So those of you that keep commenting on the Hasbro Zoids Wild kit videos asking when they're coming to physical retailers are probably going to be really pissed at me, because I still don't have an answer for that as far as when they're coming to like Walmart or Target or whatever. But Hobbytown got some today. I don't know where they bought them from, unless they bought them directly from Hasbro, but me and Chris went to Hobbytown here and literally just walked into a physical retail store and bought Zoids. So I've got the English Pincer, and the other one is Ruin. So we'll be able to do comparisons to their Japanese versions. And so yeah, this finally happened. You can walk into a physical store in the US and buy them for the first time since 2002, and that's pretty cool.
All right, so I was able to do exactly what I said I would set out to do when the Zoids Wild kits were coming to the US, which was to be able to walk into a physical retail store and actually walk out and buy them. And I think that is just awesome. It's the first time I've really been able to do that since Zoids were discontinued in the US. So that was a pretty awesome moment, and of course I bought the Pincers, as you see here, as well as Ruin, and we'll talk a little bit about these. So before I get too into it, I need to address the elephant in the room, which is that Hasbro evidently took these off of the Hasbro Pulse website, which is causing a lot of stirring in the community as people are speculating what is going on. And part of the speculation is caused by Hasbro themselves has neglected to make an official statement as to why. So a lot of people are assuming and sort of jumping to the conclusion that the Zoids Wild brand is already dead, even though we didn't have a proper mass production distribution into physical retail stores like Walmart and Target and so on. But they believe that the Zoids Wild line is dead, and then we will not get any more Zoids Wild waves to introduce the other kits into the US market, which could be the case. Again, they haven't said one way or the other. I think it is more likely that they finished their initial production run and are now going to move to physical redistribution as a separate production line, because I find it really contradictory that literally on the same day that all this controversy comes out, Hobbytown USA gets these kits physically in their store for retail price. No markup whatsoever. These were $10, the motorized ones were $20. And that's it. And I couldn't believe that they had gotten them, and I don't know where they got them. I didn't have a chance to ask, but it seems like they must have gotten them through official means, because if they bought them off of the site and were going to resell them, they would have to add some type of markup to get some kind of profit off of it, but they didn't do that. They just had them for retail, so they bought them from the supplier at cost, and we're still able to add a retail markup to the final margin, which is really interesting. So with that out of the way, let's go ahead and get into it. So Pincers is the English localization of the Kuwaga Zoid from the Japanese version of Zoids Wild, which I've already done a review on. I did a little comparison between it and its Zoids Wild Zero counterpart called Kuwaganos. In terms of the anime and the lore, the Zoid famously appears in the very first episode, where the young child Arashi is rushing out into the woods to try to capture a Zoid of his own. And the show does a nice little bait and switch thing where it shows him carrying around this big stupid net, like he's going to try to catch a Zoid that's like 5 times his size he's going to try to capture a giant beetle nonetheless with a net. And that ends up being a bait and switch when it is revealed that he has a boulder trap set up to where when the Kuwaga corners him, the boulder trap falls on the Kuwaga and crushes it, which still actually proves to be ineffective at immobilizing it, and he's in jeopardy yet again until the Fang Tiger shows up and rescues him. Other than that, this Zoid plays a very minor role in the anime and is mainly just used as a small infantry or airborne combatant Zoid by the Death Metal Empire. And so we have our little goon character that's been added here, and there is a named Pincers later on in the series. We don't get to that until episode 34, but there is a named character with a named Pincers that is used later. I think the name Pincers is kind of lazy, and I don't actually know why with the Zoids Wild anime they decided to localize names, because they had never really done that before with the Zoids in any of the previous series, with the exception of course, the Berserk Fuhrer being changed into Berserk Fury, which is more of a censorship change than a localization change. And other than that, all of the names have pretty much remained exactly the same. Even some of the names that have a more Japanese pronunciation to them have stayed the same. Whereas here in the Zoids Wild line, Wild Liger is changed to just simply Liger, Gill Raptor is changed to Ruin, and Kuwaga changed to Pincers, just as an example. And that pretty much does it for the lore explanation. Again, they don't really do a whole lot in the anime. I think they have a pretty cool design, and I like that their wings do allow them to fly. Sort of serves as a dual purpose sort of thing, because most of the flying Zoids in the previous iterations of the anime had a strictly pure airborne role, sort of like the Riddler and the Terrace were pretty much permanently bound to the air and had little to no ground capabilities, whereas this thing looks like it could go toe-to-toe with ground Zoids of similar size due to its pincers and its claws and everything like that, whereas it still allows for incredible mobility by being able to fly over the forest and mountain terrain that makes up the majority of the environment that Zoids Wild takes place in. Which is, of course, also a stark contrast to the more desert terrain that the older Zoid series took place in, both Chaotic Century and New Century. The environment definitely seems to be in Zoids Wild to be more forest and mountain sort of environments, as you can see here on the box. So we'll quickly take a look at the box. I've shown these off before with the other two wind-up kits that I got. And it does look pretty nice. The artwork, of course, is pre-rendered on it, but it does look really good. Makes the character portrait look pretty good on there. As I smack the Zoid around with the box there. And a little bit of a demonstration of the battling there. There it is against the Scorpion Zoid, which name already escapes me. So overall, I like the boxes a lot, but I don't like them quite as much as the Japanese version. So let's actually talk about the kit itself and talk about some of the differences between the Japanese version. So there's not really a whole lot to say in terms of the kit itself. It was very easy to build. One of the things that I neglected to mention about the Kuwaga in that review is that insect Zoids seem to be a bit of an aesthetic with Zoids Wild, but in all honesty, they're not really that new of a thing. There was of course, the Mulga is pretty prolific in the older series, but there's a lot more insect Zoids than that. And the Kuwaga is actually more of a spiritual successor to a stag beetle type Zoid called the Double Sorter. And I failed to mention that in the previous review. I don't have a Double Sorter to show, but I can add a picture here in the video so you guys can see what it looks like. It is very much the exact same setup, and even has the shell flaps that open to reveal the wings kind of set up like most beetles have. It's anatomically similar in that same sort of way. So there is another beetle type Zoid as well, which has a mandible that sort of protrudes out forward in front of it, and I can't exactly tell you what type of beetle this is based off the top of my head, but this is called the Cycurtus, and I, of course, have it, and we will eventually do a review of it much later down the road. But this also has a spiritual successor in Zoids Wild called the Kabutor, and I don't have one of those to do a review of. It was only part of the early Japanese waves, and due to the sort of limbo that the English Zoids Wild line is in right now, it was not introduced in Wave 1, and we don't know when it will be introduced, if at all, but it does in fact exist. So maybe we'll be able to do a comparison of those, but I do not have a Double Sorter to do a comparison with the Kuwaga here, but I do have a Cycurtus, which will get its own review eventually. And a lot of the design sensibilities with these beetle-type Zoids have remained a constant throughout all of their design. And a lot of it is the wind-up feature being on the bottom right here. So you can see the wind-up crank there, and how the front set of legs and the back set of legs are on little swivels that move with the wind-up function. And then the middle two sets of legs are just pinned in place permanently. And that is exactly the same design sensibility they went with the Kuwaga here, even down to the rubber caps being used to sort of cap each leg in place, which I think is pretty cool. Out of the two, I actually much rather prefer the Kuwaga, to be honest, because I think it's actually pretty cool where the pilot is placed there. Even though he is exposed, he is covered by a lot of armor. And I like the pincers and how the claws are on its articulated arms where they can swing out and give us a pretty nice range of motion there, which I think is really nice. Although for some reason I feel like these are a little bit more prone to popping off than on the Japanese version. I don't feel like they fit quite as deep on the pegs as the Japanese version did, but that could just be the difference in the color scheme sort of highlighting more than it was originally intended to be highlighted, so to speak. So we'll go ahead and do the comparison here. So here, of course, is the Japanese Kuwaga. And with the Wild Liger review that I did, I was able to sort of illustrate the difference in the color scheme a little bit. And there are some noticeable differences here, mainly the use of this sort of brighter gray on the weapons compared to the Japanese version, which has this semi-metallic, almost gunmetal gray black for the weapons there. The legs are pretty much the same, you know, pure black. Most of the carapace is the same color as well. Of course, you can see a lot more of the gray underneath on the American version, on the Hasbro version. The caps are actually a slightly brighter but more defiant color on the Hasbro version, and I actually kind of prefer the color of the caps on the Hasbro version just a little bit. But one of the things that's noteworthy, I think I like the color of the claws a lot more in the Japanese version. And one thing that's a little bit more noteworthy is this primary color here, this purple, is completely identical on both Zoids. You would be very hard-pressed to find a difference there. And that's actually something that I was quite surprised at. I thought it would be a little bit different, because it does appear that the shade of white for the Wild Liger is noticeably different, as well as when we get to doing the Ruin review, that will be noticeably different as well. You can definitely see what I'm talking about, though. If you see, like, where I'm pointing out right there. So you see where the peg attaches for the weapon arm right there? It looks like the peg is pushed all the way through, whereas if you look on the Hasbro version, there's like a big gap there where it doesn't come all the way through. So that's interesting. I wonder if it was slightly remolded or if I just haven't pushed it down all the way. But anyway, yeah, so the only thing I've noticed between the difference in the purple is that the Hasbro one is slightly glossier, and that's it. And it's not a noticeable difference, like if you were to put the two Wild Ligers together or the two Ruins together. Other than that, the elephant in the room difference is, of course, the pilot. Of course, the Japanese version has the clear, solid plastic pilot that all the Zoids Wild kits had in the Takara Tomy line. And then the Hasbro one has the remolded character pilot from the anime, which is a nice addition. One of the most standout additions of the Hasbro line, and they're made out of a soft plastic that sort of moves and flexes, and I'll just go ahead and pop him off and show that off. So you can see the arms kind of flex in and out like that. The legs on this one are nice and rigid, so he does kind of fit into the grooves a lot more nicely there, which is pretty cool. That is essentially all of the differences between the two kits. Nothing all that substantial compared to the previous one. So we'll go ahead and add in here, just for the sake of variety, the Kuwaganos. I'll move that out of the way. Move that out of the way. So we'll add the Kuwaganos to this occasion, which is the Zoids Wild Zero version. And that is definitely my favorite version. The orange definitely looks a little harsh compared to the more softer purple on the other two kits, but the gray meshes nicely. The translucent orange for the much more prominent weapons definitely shows off a lot more, and this one actually has, you know, insect-like translucent wings that project from the back. So if I were to recommend any of these, it would definitely be the Zoids Wild Zero version, but that's typically the case with all of the Zoids Wild kits that have a Zoids Wild Zero iteration of them. And the last thing I guess I should mention as well before I forget is, of course, the eyes. The eyes are a big point of contention with me and with a lot of other people when it comes to the Zoids Wild kits in the Hasbro line, because the eyes are so nice on the Takara Tomy ones, because they're individual little pieces that are metallic. The eyes are just molded in here on the Hasbro ones, as I've mentioned, and that's particularly noticeable here with the Kuwaga and the Pincers, as you can see, because the Kuwaga they're very metallic, they really shine and stand out, whereas they're more of a flat, they're still glossy, but they're not metallic in any way, and so they just look a lot more dull, and I think that's a huge missed opportunity with the English one. So, but yeah, that is pretty much going to do it. So we will have the Ruin review pretty soon and be able to do a comparison with that. And hopefully when we get around to doing the May Market Watch, I'll talk a little bit more about my thoughts on the Hasbro line and if it's going away or what's actually happening with it. So thank you guys so much, and I'll see you guys next time.